Welcome everybody to our Dynamics Futures event. My name is Reagan Jones. I'm a Vice President here at RAN Group. Our session today is going to cover best practices within Business Central around manufacturing and inventory planning. Just want to say thank you for joining us, and we're going to dive right in. So we often get a lot of questions around, how can we best use Business Central for MRP planning, right? So what we're going to cover today, and this is our high-level agenda, is we want to talk about at a high level what MRP actually is and why someone would use it. We want to talk about Business Central's MRP solution. I'm going to take a little bit of time to demo a few things to the team here, and then we'll wrap up with a few key takeaways. One thing I want to note is we could spend days talking about all of this. We only have 25 minutes or so today, so we're going to dive right in, hit the high points, and if you need anything else from us going forward, please feel free to reach out. So first up, what is MRP? So MRP is going to be material requirements planning. So it's going to be a very holistic process to ultimately plan what you need to do from an inventory standpoint and a manufacturing standpoint. So it's going to go through the full system. It's going to look at what we call your MPS, so your master production schedule, and then it's going to look at your bills of materials, your inventory, everything else around that, and ultimately come up with a game plan on what you need to do to move forward and have the correct amount of inventory on hand and to have a production schedule that's working and meeting your clients' demands. There's a lot of reasons why someone would use an MRP process. This is just a few. Every business is very different. But of course, these are the high points, right? If you have an MRP process that's running successfully, you're going to be very proactive about planning instead of reactive and doing the firefighting game where you're constantly looking to see what you need. If you have an MRP solution that's working well, you're going to be able to be looking ahead at when you need to purchase things, right? You're going to be purchasing things on time, right? Not after the fact and paying additional fees to get things there faster for you. And you're going to be able to put stuff into production in time as well to satisfy those customer needs. Improving inventory accuracy is another huge one. So it's going to help you prevent running out of goods, and it's also going to help you prevent overstocking goods. So it's going to help you find that balance over time, and as you input more data into it and as you begin working in it, it becomes a more and more powerful tool to help you to resolve that. It's also going to optimize your production and your procurement processing. Since MRP takes everything within the ERP and starts pulling it together, it's going to help you make those decisions by looking at everything, right? It's going to look at your different demands that you have in the system, whether it's sales or forecast. It's going to look at your current inventory levels, your bill of materials, your production plans. It's going to pull everything together so that way you can make better decisions going forward. It's going to reduce your inventory carrying costs naturally. So most MRP systems are going to try to get your inventory on hand down to zero. And the reason it's doing that is because it's helping you manage inventory less from a physical standpoint, right? So if you have a bunch of inventory just sitting in your shops or sitting in your warehouses, right, you're going to have to store that inventory. And then also you could deal with, depending on the type of inventory, spoilage and other things that come along with just sitting inventory. And the last thing is you're going to be able to make data-driven decisions, right? So as you grow your business, one big thing, of course, everybody talks about is doing something that's scalable, right? Because that's the goal in most businesses is to grow and get better. So when you have data flowing through the MRP and you're making data-based decisions rather than just going out and doing things based on what we have here, like a gut feel, you can make better decisions and you spend less time making those decisions. I started working with a client about a year or so ago, and their process was a mix between gut feel and physically going and running around and looking and seeing what they had on a weekly basis. So they would run out every Monday, look and see what they had, and they would come up with a plan of what they can build that week. So everything was very behind, right? They weren't meeting customer demands, and they also were just dealing with the fact that if they ran out of goods, they'd have to go pay a higher fee to get those goods in time so that way they could meet the customer's demand. So that's just a couple of things there on why someone would use an MRP system. So, we're going to talk about how these different things work together, and we're also going to look at an example. But I would say these are the main points. But again, every business is very different. So what you may be trying to solve for could be very different from what other people are trying to solve for. But at the end of the day, it is going to give you a better view into what's going on and how to action from a go forward standpoint. One big thing that we talk about a lot with our clients is MRP versus MPS and how do they work together. So you'll notice on the prior slides, we talked about MRP and how MPS is a component of MRP, but really understanding the difference between the two and how they work together is key. So MPS is going to be what we call your master production schedule, right? It's going to factor in when you need to do something based on the customer demands, what that final product needs to be, and it's going to help schedule out based on when that demand is there versus how long it's going to take to do something when we need to start building stuff. So MPS kind of runs on the front end of MRP, so that way we know, okay, based on what our MPS is saying, let's run MRP, and our MRP kind of explodes everything out from there. So it's going to take everything MPS suggested, and then it's going to go through bills and materials, your inventory controls, your lead times on your purchase orders to ultimately come up with a game plan of, okay, this is how we have to move forward, right? So that's how those two work together. So it's important to know those pieces, because when we talk about Business Central, you can run those pieces separately. So, and I would assume other MRP systems work the same way. But just know that they're two different things, but MPS comes first. It runs so that way MPR can finish the job, or MRP can finish the job. So next we're going to talk about Business Central's solution for MRP. So it's a very large solution. It's called the Business Central Planning Worksheet. So the planning worksheet within Business Central goes through the full system, which we'll look at in a minute, and kind of just helps you make decisions, right? You can run it separately, like I mentioned before. You can run MRP and MPS separately, or you can run them in a combined state. But the biggest thing with the planning worksheet is it goes out into all the different modules in Business Central and comes together and pulls everything together for you based on parameters that you feed it. So that way it can help you make suggestions, or it can help make decisions by providing you suggestions. So that is something I always do like to call out when we have these types of sessions, is that what the planning worksheet runs and gives you is simply a suggestion. Does not mean that you have to take it. So that's why we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but that's why you always get that suggestion and you review it and you work your suggestions in certain orders. So that way you can kind of get to the best outcome possible of, this is how we need to run our business, right? There are going to be things that pop up in the planning worksheet that it's not something you need, right? And you know that because you have that tribal knowledge, and that's perfectly fine. You delete it, you ignore it, you start working the other suggestions to get to the desired result. So I always tell people before we get into planning worksheet training or any sort of planning worksheet discussion that I think personally it's one of the most powerful tools within Business Central. And the reason I think that is because it literally touches every module Business Central has to offer, from an inventory standpoint, obviously. But it's going to go look at every little piece of data, and that's what we'll look at next to help come up with those suggestions. So it's imperative that the whole system be working as expected, being updated in real time, so that way you can get to the point where you're running this planning worksheet and it's a daily process or a weekly process, and everybody's confident in the data. So to talk a few minutes about just the data flow of the planning worksheet, right? We've talked about MPS, we've talked about MRP. So if we just focus on the top section here, the orange section, right? Obviously, we're going to have different demands coming into the system, right? So from a Business Central standpoint, that could be a sales order driving demand, or it could be a forecast, right? So you do have the ability to build out inventory forecasts in Business Central and load them and factor that into your planning. The next thing is going to be capacity, right? So we have work centers set up in the system that of course that are used on routings. They're going to have work center capacity there, so that way we know how long it's going to take something to build. And then of course we're going to look at inventory on hand. After we start looking at all of that good stuff there, right, we're going to flow into the MRP section. So top section, we figured out what we need to do. The next section is going to figure out from a very tactical standpoint, okay, what do we need to buy? What are our lead times? How is our inventory set up? When are we going to be getting purchase orders in? Kind of looking at all of those pieces together to ultimately tell you what you need to do, right? It could be creating a purchase order. It's ultimately creating production orders in the system, right? Because that's what we need to do to get things out the door to our customer. But it could have other recommendations in it that we'll look at a little bit when we look at our demo. So for our demo today, we have a very basic example that we're going to take a look at. We'll spend a few minutes kind of looking at the setups, and then I want to talk about just some ways to go through the planning worksheet. Once you start getting suggestions flowing in, the best way to kind of take a peek at stuff, a couple different ways to run it. So that way the team has an overall idea on kind of how to get started. So I have a few items set up already and kind of an item structure set up, if you will. We're going to call it the juice box. So we're going to be making apple juice boxes today, something very easy. When you start working with MRP, I do recommend kind of starting with a smaller subset of data and a few controlled scenarios. So that way you can start looking and seeing how things are going to come in, gauge whether your master data is set up correctly, and gauge how well your documents are being updated. So this will kind of give us an idea. We essentially have 4 components that are going to be going into a top level item. The components are set up a little bit different depending on the example we're going to look at, and then our finished good, of course, is set up like a finished good that we're going to produce. So if we look at apple juice first, we're going to skip over a lot of this stuff up top, and we're just going to dive straight into the replenishment and the planning tabs here. The planning worksheet uses mainly the replenishment and the planning tabs to identify how things are supposed to be planned for. So if we look at this item, we can quickly see the replenishment system is purchased. We can see that we do have a 60-day lead time to purchase this apple juice from our vendors. So that's the main thing that we're going to cover today, is just looking at lead times. There's a lot of other stuff here that we can populate if we were going to go on a deeper dive. But to keep with the simple example, we have a purchase item here. And the one thing that's interesting on this purchase item is going to be that I have it set up for fixed reorder quantity. So this is going to drive a little bit of a different outcome because I'm essentially telling the system that I don't want it to work the item to zero. So like I said earlier, in the MRP world, your system's going to keep pushing your inventory to zero unless you tell it otherwise, right? So in this particular setup, we're telling the system, we don't want to push this to zero, right? We want to push it down to a certain point of 1,000. And then when we get to that certain point, we want to order 2,000 at a time. So there's a lot of different options here. If we click the drop down on the reordering policy, fixed reordering is really important if you're wanting to do this type of control where you're saying, I don't want it to get below 1,000 or whatever parameter you set. And I also want to order in multiples of this. There's a few other options here, but I generally see people use the fixed reorder quantity or the lot for lot option. So all of my other items are going to be set up for lot for lot. Lot for lot is kind of a catch-all. So it factors really everything in, whereas some of these other items can be a little bit limiting. So for example, if you just set it to order or something like that, it's only going to look at your order. It's not going to look at what you have on hand. So I always recommend when people first start using the planning worksheet within Business Central, unless you don't want something to go down to 0 on hand, right? Go ahead and set everything for lot, test it out, see how you like it, and then you can start adjusting settings from there. So this is one of our purchase items. Like I said, our other purchase items are set up very similar. The one thing I will call out though is they don't have a lead time, and they don't really have any rules, right? So we may have a reorder point on a couple, but at the end of the day, we're just kind of wanting to test a couple of controlled scenarios to get a peek. So the next thing I want to look at is our finished good. So finished goods, of course, going to be set up a little bit differently, right? So if I scroll down, you're going to see my replenishment system is set to production order, not purchase, right? And you'll see I have a routing and a bill of materials assigned to this item. The reason why this is important is because MRP, again, factors in your production schedule as well. So it's going to do that piece first and then figure out based on, what items we need to generate the finished good, what do we need to buy? So if we look at the routing first, again, this is a very, very basic router. It's essentially going to define the steps, right? So when the process is looking at when it needs to do something, right, it's going to be looking at your routers. It's going to be looking at the steps that it takes to make that finished good, what your runtime is for those steps, and then it's going to circle back to the calendars you have set up on the work centers to see what the capacity is for those work centers and figure out when things can be done. So all of this, again, comes together because once we have this piece set, we know we have something out there like a piece of demand. We know now how long it's going to take. What the system does, it goes back and it looks at the bills of materials and says, okay, well, what do we actually need to do this? So if we have a bills of materials out here to look at, again, just in this very basic scenario, we have 4 items. We have our quantity per set up so that we know in order to make one of these finished goods, we need one of each of these things and 8 ounces of juice. it knows based on the demand that's going to come into the system, because we're looking at that MPS side, right? It's looking at that production schedule, it's seeing what it's needing. And then the NPR process is going through this piece and say, okay, this is how much I need of this, and also comparing to what you already have on hand. So all of these factors, as you're starting to see this come into play with the material planning process, and you can see there's a lot of different data points, right? So again, I'm going to keep saying this, but if this stuff is not set up, you're going to get bad results, right, in your planning worksheet. So it's something you definitely have to be mindful of. So if we go back to the item card, if I scroll down a little bit, I don't have any other parameters, set up here. Again, this is something we could talk about all day. I kind of recommend starting a little bit wide open and then narrowing down from there. So this item just has a lot for lot reordering policy. So that way it's going to be a little bit of a catch-all. It's going to look at what's on hand, what's out there. Again, this is kind of the more wide open process of running the MRP or the planning worksheet within Business Central. One fun fact I will give you is when you create an item, this value is set to blank. So just know that if you do not have a value in there and you don't have anything coming into your planning worksheet, that's that field right there. So it kind of controls if something is going to be planned or not. So that's our basic setup, and we can also look at the hierarchy here if we'd like. So we can look at the structure just really quick in one quick view. So we have our finished good, obviously an apple juice box that we're trying to make. We have our various components that we're going to need and our steps that's going to take to make it. So when we're running the planning worksheet, it should be factoring all of these different pieces in and giving us suggestions on how to action so that we can meet our demand. So we've talked about demand a couple of different times. You have forecast demand that you can do in Business Central. So I want to make sure that's very clear. If you have the ability to forecast what you're going to need or your sales or your components or however you're wanting to do it, you can upload that into Business Central. For today's sample, we're just going to simply look at a sales order, right? So some customer demand that we have coming into the system as a sales order. So I've gone ahead and created one out here for us to look at. It's very basic. There's not much to it. We're not trying to do anything complicated. But I have my basic sales and order information in, and of course I've added my item here. So if I scroll to the right over here, the biggest thing to pay attention to, of course, your quantity and your location on where the demand is coming into. But the biggest thing from a scheduling standpoint we need to pay attention to is going to be the shipment date over here. So this is what the planning worksheet looks at to determine when we need to get something done. So it's very important. So if I say that I have to ship this out on, September 5th, it's going to make sure that I go back in time and I buy everything and I build everything so that way I can do that. So it's very important, like I talked about earlier, when all your different data points are set up in the system, that they're not just set up once, but they're also maintained. So from an item card standpoint, you can do all this setup, and that one's a little bit easier, but the maintenance on what needs to happen on sales orders and other things like that has to be done. Otherwise, the suggestions that you're going to get in the planning worksheet just aren't going to be valid. So now that this is out here, we're going to hop over to the planning worksheet and just take a quick peek. I'm going to do that by searching for planning worksheet here. So the planning worksheet has already been run. So we're just going to kind of look at some of the data and see, how things are coming in. You do have the ability to do different batches, of course, just like most things in Business Central, but we just kind of have a default batch here that we've processed as needed. So a couple things here. When you go to run it, you go up to prepare and then calculate regenerative plan. When you run this, just a couple of items here. Again, you can run MPS and NPR, or you can run them separately, however you're needing, but you're also going to have to do dates. So how I've generally done it in the past is the starting date. A lot of our clients may go out a year, right? Or they may cut it off a lot sooner depending on how their business is running. But the ending date is generally going to be like the current date. I mean, you can push it out if you'd like, if you wanted to push it out for a week or so, but I've seen a lot of people just stick this to the current date. When you go to run this process, you can choose to include or exclude the forecast. So if you do have forecasts set up, you can kind of pull those in and model out, what it would do if you included the forecast, took the forecast out, and kind of look at it from a holistic standpoint there. I'm running mine based on item category because, of course, this is a demo box, right? And I wanted to have a controlled, situation. So you generally probably wouldn't be running it by item category, but what you would generally be running it by is location. So running it by location is very helpful because of a few things. So on the item card setup, we didn't really talk about it, but you do have the ability to set up what's called stock keeping units. So you can have your item card and then you can set up stock keeping units for item and location combinations, if you will. So that way, in case you plan inventory differently based on each location, you can set those parameters up separately. So for example, if location A always needs, a minimum value of, 10,000 on hand, you can set that up, and location B doesn't really use it that often. So they only need like 40 on hand. You can set those up separately. So my recommendation is if you do run into those things, you definitely set those stock keeping units up separately so they plan separately. And the reason why I say that is because you can come in here and you can run the planning worksheet based on location, because that's how it looks, right? When you're doing your sales orders or you're doing your purchase orders and you're doing all these different data points, if you have the inventory controls in place on the stock keeping unit front, when you're entering in these documents, you're selecting locations, it factors all of that in. So that way you're getting, again, the correct results. The other thing around locations I like to call out is like a QA location or like a damaged location. So if there are items that should not be factored into the planning, right? So whether they're damaged, they're in some sort of QA state, or maybe they're just something that you've pulled for something else, right? If you have those types of locations set up in the system, you can omit them from the planning process. So kind of a best practice there is if you have those types of scenarios, get the inventory out of the main locations, get that set up off to the side. So that way when you run this, you can say, you know what, plan for everything, but don't plan for anything sitting in these locations because we don't want to factor that in. So once the planning worksheet has been ran, you get, of course, a listing of suggestions. So this is, again, we don't have anything on hand, so we're going to get everything coming in, right? But if you had other scenarios where you had some on hand and you're just short 10, right, the quantities and stuff will be changing as you process and run. So if we look here, we're getting a bunch of suggestions. So we can look at this a couple different ways. We can look at what it's suggesting from an action message standpoint, and we can look at what it's telling us to do. So in this scenario, right, since we don't have enough on hand, it's telling us we need to go create a new purchase order and we need to get this in. And for this particular apple juice item, if you recall, we had a minimum order quantity. So that's why you're seeing it suggest 2,000 rather than the 800, right? We need to actually produce what our demand is out there. Everything else you can see was kind of a 1-for-1 on our bill of materials. So it's only suggesting that we get 100 because we only need to make 100 juice boxes to meet that demand. So again, your system is going to continue to work inventory down to 0 unless you tell it otherwise. So as we kind of work through these things, I always like to keep in mind a process of working through these things. So again, this is a very controlled scenario, but if we get, 1,000 suggestions, a lot of the questions we get from our clients is how do I start? Where do I start? So these action messages that pop up, there's quite a few that can pop up, right? So we have new orders, right, that it's requesting that you do. We sometimes may get suggestions that you need to change the quantity, right? So maybe your quantity isn't right and you need to, up it or lower it based on things that are happening, within the system. You may get a note to reschedule and change the quantity, right? So depending on what it's trying to do, it may say you're not going to meet that date. You need to do something else. You need to, cancel this and update this. And, you're constantly working through those things. And then of course you could have a prompt to cancel something. So if a purchase order is not going to get here in time and you don't have it set up to give you kind of any leeway, it's going to say, hey, you need to cancel this old purchase order and you need to create a new one, right? It's not going to tell you to update quantity because that purchase order isn't going to make it, right? So how I approach the planning worksheet and how we train people to approach the planning worksheet is to simply look at your cancel options or suggestions first. Work through those, see what it needs you to cancel, see why. And then from there, I say go through the change quantity and reschedule items. So that's very helpful to kind of work through those. And then finally address the new items that are coming in. So that's kind of just how I prefer to work through it. I mean, again, every business is very different. But just know that if you come up with a methodology and you do some control processing, it can be very helpful to kind of go through it in some sort of process way or thought process way, so that way it's not overwhelming. The other thing that we really run into a lot is, team members or clients will call us and say, hey, I don't know why this is coming in, right? This doesn't really make sense. It's not, I don't need this, or I don't want this, right? So what we'll do is we'll use the item availability by event tool pretty heavily. So if I highlight the line I want to dig into and I go to item availability by event, what it's going to do is it's going to give me a breakdown of why things are happening and what we're trying to work towards. So this is my favorite view because to me, it provides the best, most comprehensive way to look at things to determine why things are happening within the planning worksheet. So it has some basic data up top, of course, just to tell you what you're looking at, but I can go by day and look through and see what it's doing, right? I can see that I have a sales order driving demand of 100 of these. I can see that it's suggesting that I create a new production order to meet that demand, right? And I can also see that it's working my inventory down to 0 because it's essentially saying once you produce this production order within here, right? Because we're negative 100 now, we don't have enough on hand to cover it. We got to produce the production order and then we have to ship it out, right? So what we're ultimately working to is a 0 on hand. This may look a little bit different if we have an item that we're holding a balance for, right? So if we have inventory that we want to hold at 2,000, 1,000 on hand, it's not going to be trying to project our inventory out to 0. It's going to try to project it to what we're trying to keep on hand. The other thing that you can do with this tool is you can actually exclude the planning suggestion. So if I take that off, I can see exactly where I'm going to be if I do not action what it's telling me to do. So this is the best way, in my opinion, to kind of look and see why things are coming into the planning worksheet, how you can better, look at things, dig into things. You can also go physically dig into all the various pieces. But for me, this kind of pulls it all into one place and you can take a quick pass at it. So back to the planning worksheet just in general. So like I said, that's kind of how you can review it. That's kind of the best practice around running it. Really from here, it's determining what you want to do, right? So you have these action messages that come in, but again, this is a suggestion-based tool, right? So you don't have to action anything. You could just accept all the actions, right? And then have it run and go update everything. But I would say 9 times out of 10, the team is reviewing it, they're making decisions, and they're actioning based on what they deem fit. So when you get to that point, right, you're coming in here, you're processing this. If you're good with this, you're going to carry out the action message, and it's going to go create the purchase orders for you. It's going to go create the production orders for you, right? And it's going to factor all of that in, and it'll factor in the due dates from here. And then from that point, once your purchase orders are created, your production orders are created, you have your sales order demand sitting over here, all those dates have to be maintained, right? So if you have a purchase order that you've created from here, you're going to have to go pay attention to that expected receipt date on that purchase order to make sure that you're going to get it in time. So that's what that planning worksheet's looking at, right? So if you have a purchase order out there and it's not going to be here in time, that's when you're going to start getting stuff showing up into here saying, hey, you know what, that purchase order isn't going to make it. You need to create a new one with a new date, or you need to go review that and see if you can't get it in faster. So I guess to conclude this, right, the idea is that your data, your master data is set up in a way that, is going to draw in the correct information on what you're wanting to track. And then you have all of your document type data that you're going to have to pay attention to as well to make sure that it's flowing and maintained. So that way these suggestions that are coming in are going to be correct into your liking. The other thing too, I guess to add while we're on the topic is there are third-party tools out there that sit on this that will give you a visual. So of course, if you ever wanted to learn more about those, you can definitely reach out and we can talk about that a little bit more. So just to wrap up for today, just a few key takeaways. So there are challenges with using MRP. So we've talked about quite a few of them as we've gone through, but of course, management of setups, right? So your reordering policies, lead times is all things you'll have to pay attention to. Data accuracy from a transaction standpoint. I always tell people garbage in, garbage out. And then of course, just ineffective use of the planning worksheet, right? Not having a plan of attack when you dive in on it could cause for, everything to be very overwhelming. And then the last thing, just summarize a few things. We keep saying data, but it really is truly important. Doing location-based planning also can help. Working within the planning worksheet on a normal basis is a very good idea. Making sure that things are getting processed in a real-time standpoint. So if you're receiving purchase orders or you're doing output from a production standpoint, that's being done real-time. Setting up min and maxes, and then also always being mindful that everything is truly a suggestion and that you can work it as your business sees fit. So I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the time, and if there are any other items that we can help with, please feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to dive into your business processes and understand a little bit more about you and what you're looking for, so that way we can find the best solution. Thank you.